Modernization is totalitarian.
Yeah.
We keep talking about democracy, but modernization itself is a completely totalitarian ideology. Islamic world after the Umayyad period was no longer integrated politically. Political experience of Muslims was not around nation.
Yeah.
Every nationalism that occurred in the Islamic world, although it was against the West, was on a certain level supported by the West because it would destroy the unity of Islam. We had a very strange situation in which that part of the world which created nationalism, that is Western Europe, is now going against it and wants to unify Europe while discouraging the Muslims from doing that. Even the question of Palestine, which still lingers on, such great tragedy and the tremendous death that was caused in Gaza, 40 million innocent people killed, of a population of 2 million. If that were to be at the United States, it would mean millions of people killed. It's a very, very large number of people. And everybody's sitting and looking. Modern science is a very particular way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
It is based on, first of all, cutting the hands of God from His creation.
I would like to give you the first question. Do you believe that the lasting peace settlement between Islam and the West is achievable, especially considering within the context of these recent events? As you know, in the past there was this theory, clash of civilizations also, if you would like to refer to that, that would be possible. What are your thoughts on the prospects and prerequisite for such an agreement concerning the peace?
First of all, the modern West, since the Renaissance, have been characterized by its expansive, domineering nature. It has tried to conquer the world. You'll find Australians speaking English, and then in the middle of the Pacific, at the end, south of the Pacific Ocean, while it was English being spoken, it was the sudden explosion of Europe out over the whole of the globe with the colonial period. And therefore, with that came the idea that the only viable way of living and looking at things was the Western way. Everybody else had to catch up.
Yeah.
And other people began to adopt this idea of progressing, catching up in the West and so forth and so on, but it's still dominant in many parts of the world as a result of the colonization, not only of the Muslim mind, but also the Hindu mind, Buddhist mind, and Confucian mind, and so forth and so on. And of course, in China, went to the extreme of adopting an extreme form of Westernism, which is Marxism. But that's also Western philosophy, Western idea. So peace between the West and the Islamic world is not possible intellectually and spiritually, not because of Islam, but because of the West. We have in Islam the verse of the Quran, Lakum dinakum waliyadin. The Prophet says that to you your religion, to me mine.
Yeah.
It's not we who are forcing high schools in New York to teach according to Ottoman history, the history of the world.
Right.
It is the West that is always trying to impinge upon every aspect practically of education, of culture, of life, of people outside of its borders, from Africa all the way to the Pacific, including the whole of the Asian landmass, at least the southern part of it. The question of Russia is somewhat separate and different. Now, as far as is it possible for this to take place, yes, it is possible. And then what would the prospects and prerequisites be for such an agreement? It would be possible if the West were to accept that there's not only one legitimate civilization, there's civilizations, which in fact 19th century European philosophy of history refused to accept. Now, alhamdulillah, gradually this is being used also, that you don't have one civilization, there are civilizations. In Turkish and Persian, my own mother tongue, and many Islamic languages, because we're westernized, we said civilized, civilisé in French.
Yeah.
And that meant to be civilized, to be Western-like.
Right.
But now people are accepting that the Polynesian islands also have their own civilization. The acceptance of the multiplicity of civilizations is one very positive result of, among the many negative results of thought and action that have taken place during the last few decades. And I think this is bound to grow. The more the West becomes aware of its own faults, weaknesses, and the fact that it's falling apart, the modern world, Western world is falling apart, the more the existence of other civilizations will be attractive to people. Already, how many intellectuals do you have in leading American and British universities, Oxford, Harvard, which is my own university in the United States, who are interested seriously in Hinduism and Confucianism and Islam in comparison with the end of the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century? Much more, much, much more. So there is some hope for that, but the prerequisite to such an agreement is to accept that there are other ways of looking at the world, and people who have other ways of looking at the world have the legitimate right to look at the other views of the world according to the religion, culture, history, civilization. And there should not be a totalitarianism,
right,
which Westernization always is combined with totalitarianism. Modernization is totalitarian. Yeah. They keep talking about democracy, but modernization itself is a completely totalitarian ideology. That has to come to an end.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. You know, as you say, I think Muslims are more inclined towards, you know, multiplicity, because I know from a philosophy background, yes. You know, in the US, I have been there. They don't teach Indian philosophy or Chinese philosophy, Asian philosophies. They're working very hard now. Gradually, things are changing. Changing. Very good. Very good. I am happy about
more in the United States than in Europe.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So I would like to ask another question that is somewhat related to the first one, except this is more concerned with Islamic civilization. Historically, as you yourself know, that there was a relative unity among the Muslims, especially at the time of the High Caliphate. But after that, unfortunately, this was never achieved again. And especially when we consider today, Muslims are living more like, you know, the Western concept of nation-state type. But this concept is weakening in Europe, especially with the EU,
That's right.
European Union. We would like to know if some type of such a unity is possible in future among the Muslims also.
It's a very, very good question you ask. If you look at Islamic history,
yes,
you first have the first 60 years, which is the life of the Prophet,
right,
and the 4 Khulafa Rashidin,
right,
which is the complete unity of the Islamic world politically.
Yes.
Not only religiously, but what became the Islamic world. The Prophet ﷺ and the 4 caliphs were rulers of one single Islamic world.
Yeah.
With the rise of Muawiyah and his opposition to Ali,
right,
and the battle of fought in Syria, battle of Siffin,
yeah,
the first breach came in that.
Unfortunately.
And after the death of Ali, after he was killed,
yeah,
Muawiyah becomes the caliph, the first caliph of the Umayyad dynasty.
Yeah.
For the next 100 years, still the Islamic world was one unit.
Yeah.
Still the Islamic world was one unit from Western Asia to Spain.
Right.
A tremendously large area, but it was still one unit. After the Umayyads, with the Abbasids, especially after the first 4 Abbasid caliphs, the central authority of the caliphate became weakened, and already local rulers began to appear. Khorasan in Syria, and the Maghreb, and so I will not get into details of Islamic history. And then we had this long period, long period, up until the 20th century, or 19th century, in which you had a very deep unity of Islamic civilization. But you had different political units within the Islamic world. The Islamic world, after the Umayyad period, was no longer integrated politically. There was not one single ruler for the whole Islamic world. It spread, and then there was the Arab part, then the Turks came later on, Turks were first in Iran, and then they established their own empire here, right here in Anatolia, where it became Turkey.
Yeah.
And then Indians, Muslims, and so forth and so on, and finally in Southeast Asia, among the Indonesians and Malays and so forth, there are different Islamic states.
Yeah.
But the civilization has still guarded its unity on other levels. Like it still does today, we all pray the same way. The Quran is still the Quran for all of us.
Yeah.
Islamic laws, you might be a Shafi'i in Egypt, or you might be a Shafi'i in Jakarta, in Indonesia. You find the same interpretation, the four schools of Sunni law and the Shiite law, but they're all unified together within the Islamic worldview.
Right.
Then a new event took place within which we live now, and that is the West began to dominate the Islamic world. And after the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt, essentially, the Muslims woke up and saw that they were no longer a world power. They didn't bother the people outside. Islam was the central world power for so many centuries. All the powers that were rising in Europe before Napoleon invaded Egypt, people sitting in Isfahan and Lahore didn't even think about it.
Right.
But after that, gradually awareness arose, and opposition to the West began. Many of the major forces of opposition were actually from Sufi orders, local Sufis.
Yeah.
The most famous being Abdul Qadir Jazairi, the great Algerian hero, was finally captured by the French. But also other people, Muslims, began to try to fight local jihads, you might say, all the way from India to Morocco to Africa, everywhere in different forms into which I shall not go.
Yeah.
And then because in Europe, nationalism was very strong. Nationalism was born after the French Revolution, and the way we know it.
Right.
The French Revolution is very important ideologically as the beginning of the idea of la nation in French, which almost is like a god. And it's very, very strong. Stronger than in England because of an empire. Yeah. And that's why when you have a coup d'etat in English, you use the French word.
French word, yes.
English, we don't have an English word for coup d'etat.
Even in Turkish?
Yes, coup d'etat is a Turkish word, Persian word, the Arabic word, they use it also. But it's from French, and the English use it from French. Yeah. There have been no coup d'etats in England. It's very, very interesting. But the French Revolution brought about the idea of the supremacy of the nation.
Yeah.
La nation in French has different meaning from nation in English in the 18th century. But gradually this nationalism caught on, even within Europe itself. Yeah. For them, there was no Italy before that. Garibaldi and people who got unified Italy and made Italy a country, now Italian nation, were influenced actually by the French Revolution. There was no Germany. There were German states. To unify, under Bismarck and became the great power of Germany, all occurred as a result of that event. This entered into the Islamic world itself. And gradually local nationalisms began. And at first, it really didn't have a meaning because the political experience of Muslims was not around nation. Yeah. In the modern sense. Right. Yes, the Persians and the Sudanese were different. They knew they were not the same, they didn't speak the same language, the color of the skin was not the same, but they did not think of nationalistic categories like we do now. Yeah. But gradually, this became more and more strengthened. You began to get the rise of three major different types of nationalism, which are very, very different from each other: Arabic, Persian, or Iranian, and Turkish. Put aside the case of India, which was under colony of the British, I will not talk about them. And each of these reacted in a different way. Yeah. For the Turks, it was a racial matter. Right. To the Turkish race. Yeah. Adam was a Turk. You know, the extreme things written by Turkish in the 19th century. Yeah. For the Arabs, it was the language. Whoever spoke Arabic was an Arab. Yeah. What determined Arab nationalism was not blood. The Egyptians, for example, look very different from the Saudis. Yeah. But they're all Arabs because they speak Arabic. Yeah. For Persians, it was cultural. Yeah. It was neither linguistic, nor blood, racial, biological, but cultural. Of course, the other elements were also present, but the emphasis in the three major nationalisms was that. Of course, there was smaller nationalism like Kurdish and so forth, which still goes on. There's no Kurdistan. We try to unify Turkish Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan, Syrian Kurdistan, Iraq into one Kurdistan. It has not happened. So some of these nationalisms were around, but they didn't result in major political transformations. But those three major nationalisms gradually began to dominate the political scene. So when you ask nations after the caliphate, whereas they operate within the framework of a nation state, this is true. There were people who still talked about the Khilafat movement, Caliphate movement. You had it in Turkey, even the time after Atatürk came to power. They were put down, but they had it in Turkey. You had it very, very strongly among Muslim Indians. And they were in touch, in fact, with the Turkish sultans before their fall. The Khilafat movement in India and what's today Pakistan. Iran being a Shiite country didn't have the Khalifa, so had a king which had a very important religious aspect tied to it. But anyway, they all thought that the success of the West, having power, wealth, and so forth and so on, was in the nation state. And the West encouraged that very much in the Islamic world, because then it could treat the Islamic world as small little units, divide and conquer. So every nationalism that occurred in the Islamic world, although it was against the West, was on a certain level supported by the West, because it would destroy the unity of Islam. They were not afraid of little states here and there. And so the creation of nation state was encouraged. For example, the British and the French, they were the ones, the British, for example, in the Persian Gulf, in the Sassanid period, the whole of the Persian Gulf was part of Iran, for the Persian Empire. Then the Arabs came south and lived there, and they still do. And then instead of having one state, they divide them to little sheikhdoms. Each little town has its own sheikh. Still, many of them are around there, so they could rule over them very easily. They were small little units. And so the West became the great supporter of nationalism in the Islamic world. Then the West itself, Europe, nationalism did not begin in America, it began in Europe. In Europe, where nationalism was born, they decided this doesn't work anymore. Especially after the Second World War, there were gradually all these movements to unify Europe. United Europe, right now, if you have a European passport, you don't have to have a visa to go to any country. Whereas if you want to go from Iran to Iraq, Iraq to Syria, you have to have a visa. So we had a very strange situation in which that part of the world which created nationalism, that is Western Europe, is now going against it and wants to unify Europe, while discouraging the Muslims from doing that. Those very countries which are unifying together are completely against the Muslims uniting. Because they don't want an Islamic world like Europe. They want an Islamic world that has copied Europe of the 19th century with little states, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Italy, this, that, Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire breaking up into Hungary and Austria, and France and Spain and so on and so on. That's, we have this very, very paradoxical situation. So is it possible for Muslims to achieve a new form of unity in the contemporary world?
Similar to EU, maybe.
Yes, it is possible. But it has to be based on something that's now very difficult. And that is that the ordinary Muslims, uneducated ordinary Muslims, they don't have a sense really of nation state as the elite of these countries do. And for example, people travel across the border between Iran and Afghanistan, peasants come and go in my own country, and they can't even stop it, they think they're in the same country.
No passport, nothing.
All the governments in the Islamic world are there by virtue of being governments of nations.
Right. Right.
If these nations were to unite together, what would happen to these governments? They would have to go home and go start a shop and to make a living. So all the governments are against it.
Yeah.
That's the great problem.
Right.
And they act very, very selfishly. Of course, there have been attempts of unifying Islamic states, the OIC, this institution, and so on and so on. But they have not been able yet to overcome those boundaries drawn by European geographers, which defined various Islamic countries. Even the question of Palestine, which still lingers on, which has great tragedy and the tremendous death that was caused in Gaza, 40 million innocent people killed, of a population of 2 million. If that were to be at the United States, it would mean millions of people killed. It's a very, very large number of people. And everybody's sitting and looking. Why isn't Egypt doing anything? Because of nationalism, in the sense that the other Egyptians, if they're, even Arab nationalism is not strong enough to be able to overcome that. So the West is able to manipulate all these states.
Yes.
Whether it's Saudi Arabia, Egypt, any of these countries, they sit there and play basketball or football, everybody watches while the brothers are getting killed across the border. I said jokingly, now there are only 2 Arab states left who can do anything, Iran and Turkey. At least these 2 states are aware and trying to help. The Arabs themselves, khalas, they do nothing, they do practically nothing. So it is possible for Muslims to unite in the contemporary world, but it means that they have to make a great sacrifice, as some people, of giving up authority. Giving up authority with all the privileges that go with it, to create a unified authority, a caliphate-like institution, and then we have local rulers or something like that. But I think it's possible. And it's very paradoxical that we in the East, who try to copy the Europeans in every way possible, even how to put a handkerchief in our pocket, and what to put on our neck, and so forth and so on. When it comes to this very big issue, why can't we copy them? Why is it that a Belgian can go to Germany without a visa? They just get in a train and go. And you cannot go to Tehran the same way. Or go to Syria the same way. So it's a very, very critical issue. But I believe that the pressure is such that if the Islamic world doesn't try to play dead, tries to wake up to the reality of the situation more and more, that will happen. That will happen.
Yes, Professor, there is, if we pass to another question, which I know you are very much concerned, this is relating to the feelings of some Muslims. You said earlier in one of your publications, unless we demolish the secular humanistic foundations of modern science that have been in place since the Renaissance and combine them with a more contrasting knowledge, it's impossible for Muslim scientists to operate in a way that remains true to the essence of intellectual world of Islam. So how is this possible? And also, one of my colleagues actually, he said, please relate my feeling that I would like to congratulate him to be the first Muslim intellectual to bring this issue in the earliest times.
Astaghfirullah, that Allah Ta'ala put me through this experience to prepare me for this, because I am, astaghfirullah, the first Muslim intellectual who had a deep training in around spiritual intellectual tradition, and also the highest Western education in the best Western institutions like MIT and Harvard, and first in my class, and know Western science quite well, and know what Islamic philosophy, and I was able to criticize Western science, not on the basis of shouting kuffar or something like that some alim would do, but with logic and with understanding. And now there are many others, alhamdulillah, in the field. And I'm happy now that I'm at the end of my life to see the fruit of this over half-century effort, with more than that 70-year efforts I've made since I've been making in my 20s. I believe the sentence that you read, yes, this is a text of mine. it is totally false
Yeah.
for all Muslims to identify Western science with the word ilm, which comes from Arabic, which you have in Turkish and Persian and Urdu and Swahili, all the Islamic languages, Malay and so forth. Modern science is a very particular way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
It is based on, first of all, cutting the hands of God from His creation.
Right.
I have an honors degree in physics from MIT.
Right.
So I speak as someone who knows something about physics.
Yeah.
You can be a pious Christian, you can be an atheist. It doesn't matter to the field of physics.
Yeah.
That is what for us in Islam is central. The reality of Allah Ta'ala.
Right.
The fact that He is not only Al-Haq, but Al-Khaliq, the creator of this world, and the sustainer of this world, and also reflect His reality is totally irrelevant to modern science.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot have an Islamic civilization which has the Quran on the one side and modern Western science on the other side, and sends its children to high school and colleges to study Western science as science.
Yeah.
And engineering is the application of that. That civilization will collapse.
Yeah.
That will collapse. That's why I wrote this. We must demolish the secular and humanistic foundation of modern science.
Yeah.
I never said that sodium and chlorine added together do not make salt.
Yeah.
I said the foundations, the secular and humanistic foundations of modern science. We have to be able to integrate modern science into our own very rich scientific tradition, which is one of the things I've sought to do all my life. And I'm very, very sad that I wrote books over 50 years ago on Islamic science that are taught still in universities in my own country, around 1 million copies. So why has another generation come and replaced it? I would be very happy to be forgotten and have some other person pursue this. It's very sad, very, very sad, but we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to teach our children at school from that age on the Islamic science, but rooted in the Islamic tradition.
Yeah.
And then Western science from the point of view of Islamic science. Not learn Western science as a revelation from heaven and then applied to our thought and civilization and everything, and live as a house divided unto itself.
Yeah.
Christ said, a house divided unto itself shall not endure. Saying from the Gospels of the Christians.
Yeah.
And of Saint also our Prophet ﷺ. We cannot endure like that. We must be able to have an integrated worldview. We must be able to criticize modern Western science. We must be able to integrate that in that which is acceptable, reject that which is not acceptable.
Yeah.
That's what the great Islamic civilization at the beginning did with Greek science and Greek culture.
Right.
Translate all these works in mathematics, algebra, medicine, astronomy, and so on and so on, from Greek and Syriac into Arabic, and created the great Islamic scientific tradition.
Right.
But didn't accept everything. It rejected completely the Greek mythology of the gods.
Right.
Where are the Olympian gods in Arabic?
Yeah.
They aren't there.
Yeah.
So we have a very good lesson from our own ancestors.
Yeah.
If these people who call themselves Salafis, which means following the ancestors, followed not only a few illiterate people walking the desert in Arabia, but followed actually what our Salaf did, and it would be wonderful.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're doing. Fortunately, again, here there are some changes to be seen. Yes, there are some changes to be seen. And strangely enough, although I've been in exile from my country for 40 years, Iran and Turkey, which have two very different political structures, are the two countries in which this has been done most. They're also in Turkey. There are a number of very important scholars who are beginning to realize this, who are writing critical views of Western science and Western philosophy. And in Iran, there are many now. There are many, many now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Professor. Just before we finish, I would like to ask if you have any suggestions, like nasiha or wasiyya for Muslim youth in general and Turkish youth in particular?
Actually, the nasiha, the advice I have for all Muslim youth is the same, whether they're Turkish, Persian, Arab, or whatever.
Right.
Most important thing is to be authentically oneself, to accept our own culture, civilization as our own.
Yeah.
Not to always live on artificial and borrowed terms.
Yeah.
Not to always try to emulate and ape another civilization. To have actually confidence in our own tradition.
Yeah.
First of all, our religion, what flowed from it in the form of hadith and sunnah, of the Prophet ﷺ, the religious level, but also on the intellectual level, on the artistic level. We cannot jump suddenly and play 12-tone music of Schoenberg without knowing classical Ottoman music or classical Persian music, like so many of our musicians do. I'm just giving music as an example. Right. Or start painting like some expressionist painter after Picasso without knowing our own tradition of painting and so on. Right. Go back to our own tradition, learn and be rooted in it. And the same way, generation after generation, while Islamic civilization was alive, new generations came who created in both continuity and new creativity. They're both there. But if you don't have continuity, then gradually the plant dies out. And the great Islamic civilization will no longer flourish. So pray for all of them wherever they are, the young men and women. The hope of the Islamic world, of course, is on them. And inshallah, Allah Ta'ala will help everyone to keep this candle burning until the end of time.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to have this nice interview.